Welcome to the Daily Bible Reader Podcast. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and the mission of this podcast is to read the Bible from beginning to end every single year, starting in 2024. If that mission sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you to grab your Bible and read along with me. And on today's episode, I am super excited because we are in a new book of the Bible. We are starting Exodus. So today we are going to read Exodus 1 through Exodus 3. So kicking it off with Exodus 1, Israel increases greatly in Egypt. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan and Naphtali; Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and they grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Pharaoh oppresses Israel. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Exodus chapter 1. Not too much commentary from me on this one, but I do have a couple of verses that I want to hone in on. The first one being verse 8, where we can sense in this verse that there is a shift in leadership. And because there's a shift in leadership, there is a shift in how the Israelites are being treated. The Bible tells us in verse 8, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph." And because the Bible gives us that level of context, we know that this change in leadership is going to result in a change in the relationship that the Egyptians have with the Israelites. And so, if we keep reading verse 9, and he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us." Verse 10, "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." For me, in reading that, I want to read it first in context before I take it to our current situations and our lives. So you can tell by verse 9 and verse 10 that this new king of Egypt is trying to use fear to push his people to treat the Israelites in a certain manner because they didn't feel this way on their own. This newfound fear that the Egyptians have about the Israelites didn't come from them, it came from their leadership. He has his own fear and he pushes that fear onto his people, resulting in them treating the Israelites a certain type of way. And taking that situation into modern context to try to apply principles as a leader, it doesn't matter if we're thinking about you being a leader in your home, a leader in your job. If you have younger siblings, they look up to you for leadership, regardless of if they want to admit it or not. All of those situations where you have people who are looking up to you, the way you move throughout the world and the decisions that you make, they matter and they impact those around you. As a leader, you have the ability to spread your thoughts and your ideas and your emotions and send those to the people around you. And you have to ask yourself on a daily basis, what message am I sending? Am I propagating fear amongst those that are closest to me, or am I encouraging them to continue to be the best version of themselves, that they can have obstacles in their way and they can knock them down? What are you either doing or speaking to those around you? Because we can see in the Bible that this king is speaking fear that was not in existence. He's speaking it into existence into these Egyptians. And if you, again, are a leader in any capacity, I would just ask that you think about, what are you pushing out or propagating to those around you? So, from verses 9 and 10, if we drop down just a little bit, we'll get into the story with the midwives. And what I love about this is that if we continue reading from, if we read from verse 15, it says, "Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shirpah and the other Puah, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. I just love the fact that these midwives feared God and they were, even though it wasn't popular, even though they were ultimately risking their lives, they still decided to stand on the fear of the Lord versus the fear of man. And they put the fear of God above all else. And that's just so encouraging for us, that we should fear God above all else, above the opinion of man. It doesn't matter what humans say they can do what to you, the fear of God goes above all of that. And so, moving forward to chapter 2 of Exodus, the birth of Moses. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dipped it in bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would happen to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." The woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Moses flees to Midian. One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you came home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zorpah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." God hears Israel's groaning. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Chapter 2 of Exodus, I think, is pivotal, is the way that Moses is born, because we know that at minimum, Pharaoh wanted all the boys that were born to the Hebrew women, he wanted them killed. But we see towards the end of chapter 1, then Pharaoh commanded all of his people, "Every son that is born to a Hebrew you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." And so that kind of sheds some light on ultimately why Moses' mother had to put him in the river, because she could no longer hide him. But what I want to talk about is, and it's so fascinating to me because when I was originally reading this, I was so like giddy and so happy because I started to make connections with Genesis. So the Bible in chapter 2, verse 1 tells us that a man from the house of Levi went and took a wife, a Levite woman. And any other time, I promise you, I would have just read that and not thought anything of it. But literally, we saw in Genesis chapter 49 that when Jacob was blessing his sons, he called out Levi. In Genesis 49, verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul not come into their counsel. So we know that Levi and his brother Simeon erred on the side of violence. And why is that pivotal? I don't want to say killers, but we know that Levi did kill all of those men on behalf of his sister. And we see that's the house or the son of Jacob that Moses comes from. And we see just learning about Moses initially that Moses does something similar. And so I found it so fascinating that I again missed it when I was reading the Bible in 2023. But that is so important when the Bible tells us like someone's lineage and where they come from, whose house are they from, is so important and critical because it really helps us connect those dots. The second thing I want to call out about chapter 2 of Exodus, if we drop down really to verse 10, is where it talks about Pharaoh's daughter and how she named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water. This again is just another call out to the naming of people and how pivotal it is that people literally name things based off of what they were to them. So, for example, how she drew Moses out of the water. So that's why she named him Moses. And we'll see again towards the end of chapter 2 that Moses literally names his son because of his sojournings. And so the name of the thing is actually the thing itself. So names had a very literal meaning to them. And so one thing that I do want to call out, I know that I mentioned that Moses was from the house of Levi, and we know what the son of Jacob Levi did. And that's not all that we see, though, about Moses. And in this one chapter, we see three different incidences where Moses is just trying to help, right? He ended up killing the Egyptian, but we see another incident where when two of his fellow Hebrews were going back and forth, he tried to step in the middle of it and tried to talk to the one who did wrong. And we see where Moses was trying to assist the women who were just going down to the well to get water to water the flock. So I think that overall, like when we look at just these three incidences in one chapter about Moses, the Bible is really trying to give us insight into Moses's character. Moses cares about justice. Moses cares about doing right by people. You can argue that he shouldn't have killed that man, and I wouldn't say that you're wrong. But in terms of Moses' character and what he stands on, we can see that whether he is among the Egyptians or whether he's in a faraway place like Midian, that Moses is who he is and that he's a man that cares about justice and he cares about doing right by people. And of course, one of the last things I want to call out about this particular chapter is going to be where God hears the groanings of Israel. I love it in verse 24 where it says, And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. God saw the people, and God knew. The Bible is again letting us know that there is a shift, that there is a shift that's about to happen. And I love the fact that it's phrased this way because it says it in a way that lets us know it's about to go down. God is about to come back into the mix of this thing. And depending on who you've heard from in sermons, your churches, I think a lot of scholars agree that from this point of the story, the Egyptians and the Hebrews have been in the land of the Egyptians for 400 years. And so we see here that it says, and God knew. So letting us know as readers, it's about that time. It's about that time that God is going to step on the scene and God's about to make some changes to fulfill what both Jacob and Joseph said as they were dying, that God is going to bring you guys out of this place. And so, with that, as we shift forward into chapter 3 of Exodus. Chapter 3, The Burning Bush. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that Moses turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Egypt shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go on a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt and all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. There's really one portion of chapter 3 that I want to focus in on, and it's going to be verse 11, where it says, But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Verse 12, he said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people up out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. I love the way that God addresses Moses's fear, because again, we see fear here, and that's where it's coming from. Moses is Again, he fled from this place because he knew that Pharaoh was going to try to kill him because of what he did to the Egyptian. And so now Moses is in this land. He has a son. He's doing, one could argue, well for himself. And now he sees this burning bush. And this burning bush changes his life because he decides to turn aside and see. And now he's engaging in a dialogue with the creator of the world. And Moses says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" But God says, "But I will be with you." God responds to Moses when Moses asks a question that partially probably comes from fear, because now Moses is being asked by the God of the universe to go back into the place that he left because he thought he was going to be killed. So he's partially probably asking God this out of fear, but saying, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and I should do these things?" And I love just the first few words of the response of God, because God says that I shall be with you. And I think oftentimes as humans, let's just focus on the fact that God is with us. Let's not focus so much on the opposition, on the thing that we're being asked to do, on how insurmountable the circumstances may look and they may feel. God is with us. And when God is with us, that's literally all that we need. And so I would encourage you to shift your focus from whatever circumstance that you're going through, whatever thing that you might be facing in this moment, and just remember that if God is with you, that's all that you would ever possibly need. So, guys, I hope that you found this commentary helpful. I hope that you are enjoying how good Exodus is getting as we are about to shift and get into the Israelites coming out of Egypt and what that process is going to look like. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you found some value out of this content. If you did, please leave me a rating or a review wherever you are listening. This would mean the absolute world to me, and I'd love to hear from you on social media. Please feel free to reach out on Twitter at His Eternal Word, the number one, and please feel free to visit the website at www.thedailybiblereader.com. And I hope you stay tuned for the next episode.